Adaptive reuse has become one of the hottest topics in architecture post-pandemic. The idea of converting buildings, especially underutilized office buildings with high vacancy rates following COVID, is increasingly seen as an essential step toward making our cities more economically resilient. Adaptive reuse is also viewed as a powerful means of reducing our carbon output to reduce emissions that contribute to climate change. Rather than building a whole new building from scratch, adaptive reuse allows older buildings to remain and take on new lives. Often this practice of recycling buildings is brought up in conversations regarding housing. But office buildings, especially large, modern office buildings built since the 1970s, can be devilishly tricky to turn into housing stock. But projects like Post Houston demonstrate that these structures can still have second lives with some ingenuity. Prior to Blackwood SkyFarm opening on top of the building, who would have dreamed of a 1-acre farm on top of a former U.S. post office building? Today on the program, we're talking about 2 agricultural projects in downtown Houston demonstrating the range of possibilities with adaptive reuse and offering new models for how we can feed ourselves. I'm Weston Twardowski, an instructor in Rice University's Environmental Studies program and the program manager of the Diluvial Houston Initiative, and you're listening to Gulf Streams on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM, where we talk with leading experts and community leaders to better understand the environmental problems and potential solutions facing our community. Before we dive in today, I'd like to remind listeners that if you haven't yet liked and subscribed to our podcast, please go do so. Tell a friend. It really helps us to get the word of the program out to a broader audience. In the first half of the hour, we'll be joined by Cath Conlon of the Blackwood Educational Land Institute. Later in the hour, we'll chat with Bart Womack, CEO of Eden Grow Systems. Cath Conlon, welcome to the program.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great, yes. I love these cool afternoons and days, and drippy
nice.
days too. Yes,
it is. We're getting a little bit of that. Texas, the full gamut of weather that's going on.
Right.
So just to start us off, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Blackwood Educational Land Institute?
Yes. So Blackwood Educational Land Institute is something that I started 40 years ago.
Wow.
And so it's been a long time. But when it first started, nature was our focal point. And then we switched it soon so that food became our focal point. And when we changed, that was really a game changer across the board, because you can talk about nature all day long and never talk about food. But if you're going to talk about food, you have to talk about nature. It's called Blackwood because my great-grandmother's full-blood Shawnee Indian. And that's where I picked up my passion, my interest, there's just such an alacrity about me when I am focused on that. And it's driven me my whole life. But I really had no idea that I would feel this way. But we're 40 years later, and I still have a hard time going to sleep at night because I'm so excited about what I get to do the next day.
That's exciting to hear.
Yes, it is exciting to hear. So it's lasted a long time. So we have 23 acres of land between Navasota, Chapel Hill, and Hempstead. Okay. And we just added about 4 years ago another 10 acres of land.
Wow.
And about a year and a half ago, we added a 1 acre of land on the roof of the downtown post office.
Yes. So the 40 acres is that kind of main campus just outside of town.
Yes.
And then today we're really excited to talk more about, that 1 acre in downtown. Can you tell us a little about the SkyFarm, what it is, and where that idea came from?
Well, there was a young man by the name of Frank Liu, and it was his desire, his interest to take that whole post office image and reimagine how it could be used. And so it's broken up into 3 different atriums, I guess. There's an X atrium that's for the arts and retail. There's an O atrium, which is all food and drink. And then there's a Z atrium, which is business. And then on the roof, there is a 1 acre farm. And we have 1 foot of soil, and it turns out that 1 foot of soil is just enough for us to be able to grow thriving, interesting food there. Yes.
I was going to ask, is a foot, I mean, on one hand, I'm like, a foot of soil, that's nothing. And then I'm sitting here going, I mean, I grow things on my patio.
Right.
Probably less than that.
Yes. So it's a foot of soil, and it is the temperature, the climate is completely different up there compared to being on the ground. So we have learned that if it takes a seed longer than 60 days to germinate, that's not a good seed for us to plant. They need to germinate and come up quickly. And it's hotter there than it is down below on the ground. And I thought there would be some challenges with water because there's 2 half-acre plots, and underneath each half-acre, there is a lot of drains. So when the rain hits the soil or hits the ground, it runs straight to those drains and goes down into a gray water system. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have to water really often. And we do have to water more often. But it's not as big an issue as I thought it would be.
I mean, I'm curious to hear about the many lessons that you've learned. But first, I want to go back, since you did tease us a little bit with some of those plants you've been able to grow up on the roof.
Right,
So
yes.
what kind of things are you growing?
Well, eggplants are very happy.
Oh, wow. All right.
Tomatillas are really happy.
Okay.
Roselle, lemongrass, strawberries, watermelons. Those are all foods that are really happy.
Wow.
And herbs just love it there. Tomatoes do not like it.
Okay.
I don't know why, but they don't. I mean, part of it is that the soil, although they're natural products, it's not what our ground soil would be made out of. It's made out of a shale, a peat moss, and a perlite, and clay. And so when all those pieces weave together or kind of settle in together, it creates a really hard soil. And so if the roots are big, they have a hard time pressing through that fabric of soil. But if they're tiny, they just make their way down, and it's really lovely.
Why was that soil combination what you gravitated towards?
I did not do that. Before Blackwood was there, they had been talking to several other farmers.
Okay.
And that was their choice.
So there was always a desire, it sounds like, to have a farm up there.
Yes, there was always a desire. So the building is a LEED certified building, and although you don't have to have a farm in order to be LEED certified,
LEED certification, for those who aren't familiar, is an environmental standards of certification for the building, and a big part of why the Post was able to get that certification was because they reused the existing post office building.
Exactly. So because they put a farm there, it gave them extra points going towards LEED certification.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I mean, I gave them a design for what the fields would look like, a whole list of all the plants that we were going to grow. So they took all of those components into consideration when they were looking for the LEED certification.
And so how much are you actually able to grow in an acre on top of a building? I'm curious about, what that out, because I've been there, and I mean, on one hand, it's not massive, but it also is impressive, and you've got this beautiful view of the skyline of Houston, and you're, standing in something like, I'm in a farm. This is so foreign. Right.
It is one of the most magical experiences anybody could have. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, really. So how much can we grow? So I can tell you that we are still in a little bit of an experimental phase.
How long have you been there now?
A year and a half.
Then that makes total sense to me.
Right. So we've gone through all of the growing seasons, but we're still experimenting with I know on the ground what I have to direct seed, and I know which ones I have to start in little 1-inch cubes and move them up to 4-inch pots. But there, we just don't know that yet. And so we're still experimenting. So I can tell you that I was just at another rooftop farm in California. They have a different climate, but it was just right under an acre. And they grow 25,000 pounds of food
Wow.
on that one roof.
Wow. So that's a substantial amount of food.
It is. It's a substantial amount of food. And our goal is really to have food partners so that, like a community center, so that we can just grow the best food that we can possibly grow and then give it to them. But they support the farm in everything that we need in order to be a successful farm. But we just get to focus on growing the food, watering, harvesting, packaging, weighing, doing everything, all of that to the best of our ability, harvesting it when it's at its peak point of nutrition, and then harvesting it and then giving it away.
Yeah.
So if we could find 3 partners like that we could just give that food away and then they would share it and distribute it from there, that would be lovely. But as it is right now, we are growing and marketing and selling. And we actually have a USDA grant. And we're a nonprofit organization. And we have a farmer's market. And that's what the grant is for, is to open a farmer's market there, because the owners of the building want there to be a farm there. They want for school children to be able to come and know where their food comes from.
Well, I think that's something that, the name of your organization, right? Blackwood Educational Land Institute. I think that's very key. And so maybe brings back a little bit to, I'm just curious, and I want to hear more about your mission in general in a moment. But, when you were first, thinking of moving to an outdoor, atop a roof space, what was it that excited you enough to say, yes, let's take on this seemingly crazy, I'm sure at least somewhat daunting project of putting a farm on the roof?
Yes, it was very daunting. Well, as soon as the idea was put, one of our board members, Jeff Kaplan, is the person that brought the idea, and he said, Blackwood has always wanted to have a farm in town. But the land is very expensive. How in the world are we going to do that? And we can only reach so many people when we're out there. Once people come out, they can't stop coming. Yeah. But how do you get them to come initially? And
I can say I have been to Cath's, original site, her main campus. And if you haven't been, run to the campus. It's beautiful, and it's a great way to spend your day.
Right. Yes. So what was interesting, mostly, it was like we get to share it with more people. We get to spread our practices to more people. We get to teach about farming and where your food comes from. And, Houston has, I don't know how many cultures we have here. Do you?
A lot.
A lot?
Probably too many to count.
80? I don't know. We have a lot. And it's like a melting pot. And so the idea of being able to come together in this one spot and share all of that. So the demographics of the people that come to the farmers market on Sunday afternoon, it's so wild. It is so exciting to see. I love it. So what excited me about it, mostly that was it. It was just we get to spread our wings a little further. We get to experiment with what can grow on a roof, because I imagine that there will be a lot more. There will be a lot more of farms on roofs, because we need to be able to protect the roof from the sun. We need to insulate it. We need more food. People are moving into town, so they need to know that they can get their food more easily. You're going to cut your carbon footprint down from 1,000 miles to literally feet.
Yeah. This is so fascinating, because you're getting at here, this idea of green roofs that, is very much part of a broader environmental movement around the idea of different forms of infrastructure, and exactly as you were saying, different ways to insulate, different ways to, reduce that heat island effect. And so a lot of potential benefits from green roofs. I've never really considered that, though, as a viable space to farm.
Oh, it is. It very much is. So we are generating the data necessary that any engineer would need in order to begin from the foundation designing the building so that it can literally hold the weight of what's necessary to farm. So where we are right now, we can't do water harvesting, but that would be so fabulous if we would be able to do that. We need a place to be able to compost. So I imagine there's 8 acres around the whole post office. And at some point, I would imagine those will be built up. And if we put farms on those, on the roofs, and connect them through sky bridges, how cool would that be?
That would be fantastic.
Right. Yes, I think so too.
You mentioned composting, which I want to have, I think down the road we're definitely going to have a conversation just around composting in Houston in general. But, I think something that it points to, and in thinking about, those insulation properties of the roof and the kind of green roof approach, you had mentioned, wanting to share your practices with the larger audience. And I think what you're getting at there is I've heard you talk about this before, but, the notion of regenerative agriculture, that you are really invested in modeling and thinking about different ways that agriculture can exist separately from the industrial kind of systems we've set up, and in really ways that are healing, both to the soil itself and the plants, but also communities. And so
Right.
I'd love to hear you talk about regenerative agriculture and some of the work that Blackwood does thinking about that.
Right. Regenerative agriculture and healing communities is really huge. I really hope that, it's hard to farm. It's very hard to farm. And if there's any way to provide support for farmers in general in a downtown area and out in the country as well, they just need that support. So I'll talk about that later. So we make compost tea, and we use mature compost as a starter, much like you would sourdough bread.
Okay.
And then we add kelp and seaweed, other seaweeds, and algae to it. And algae is a new ingredient that we've started adding to our compost tea because every cell of algae lives in a bag of water. And water, it's our future wars will be about water. So it's just one of our most valued resources. So how can we protect that? And algae is regenerative itself. If you get enough algae in the soil, it reaches that tipping point that it just starts regenerating on and on and on and on and on, microbes in the soil. And so that's what we're doing. We're promoting the microbial growth and life in the soil because that's what makes our food so nutritious.
And so, this is, thinking of composting, but also you mentioned water harvesting. It just sounds like you're thinking around a range of practices to model, methods of utilizing everything we have, of conserving what we have, of using exactly as you're saying, kind of natural filtration methods to really help heal things. And so, are those, some of the key priorities for your work?
Sure, absolutely. Composting, worms do a great job of composting. They have lightweight. Black soldier flies are an amazing way to compost. They're also incredibly lightweight. They will eat everything and they'll leave all their castings behind. So yes, we're just getting away from it's all organic. So we're getting away from using any sort of chemical pesticides or chemical food at all. We use a lot of blackstrap molasses.
What do you use that for?
Well, what do you use it for in your body when you're talking about sugar?
I'm thinking because I'm like, I never buy the blackstrap. I always buy the other molasses because I'm afraid to cook with blackstrap. So now I'm really excited.
Yes. Well, when you eat food, whatever it is, your body converts it to sugar, and that makes it easier to digest. It's exactly the same way with plants. And I just asked you earlier if you knew a plant person. So just let me tell you one thing that I just learned.
Please.
It's about plants, and that's what we're all about. So we have icebergs that are melting, and we have icebergs that are melting. We've got oceans that are rising, and then we've got salt water that's coming in and not diluting, but infiltrating our soil. So how in the world are we going to protect against that? So guess what? These plants, that not all of them, but most of them, have a way that they pull all the salt out. So I just recently looked at a slide of a quinoa plant. And every scientist at the Danforth Plant Science Center in St. Louis, they all have an artist that they work with. And the artist gives shape and definition to all the different body parts. And they gave shape to these salt bladders that are a part of the quinoa plant. And when the plant sucks up the salt water, the bladders pull the salt out. And then the quinoa gets all the fresh water. To me, that's just such an amazing intelligence out there in the world that we need to tip our hat to.
So I want to zoom out for a second, because you had mentioned a little bit at the top, you've been at this for 40 years. You started thinking of nature. Now that we've gotten to the regenerative part, I've heard you talk before about the story of the original Blackwood property and, the way that it was used and how you spent a lot of time and a lot of years trying to remake that land into something that is much, more regenerative than what it was. And so I wonder if you can talk us through a little bit of that process.
Sure. I got there and decided I was going to plant a garden, and I did, and it was awful. And so I sent all the soil off to be tested, and they called or sent me reports back and said that it has a lot of chemicals in it, and everything is going to be eaten by aphids and other insects because the plants are not healthy on their own. They're not strong on their own. So I pulled all the plants out of the ground. I tilled it all under, and I planted another garden, but I didn't give it any kind of pesticides or food or anything. And this time it was a beautiful garden, and I called the people that did the testing, and they said, "You're living off of the residue from the chemical fertilizers that were there before," and they said at some point these plants are going to be eaten by aphids or other bugs. So I went out and I looked underneath every leaf, and it was full of aphids. So I plowed it under, and then I planted Elbon rye, crotalaria, buckwheat. I planted every kind of cover crop I could imagine, and I let it grow and I cut it down, let it grow and cut it down. And I probably did that for 3 years.
Wow.
Because that's what it took in order to detox the soil, and that's really what it was like. There's a book by Dr. Daphne Miller, and it's called Farm Ecology, FARM, and she talks a lot about the correlation between the human body and the soil. And it is so incredibly closely related. That helped me understand a lot about the soil and how we need to treat it and feed it.
I mean, everything you're talking about, I'm just getting such a sense of an appreciation for the amount of time, I mean, both to kind of rehabilitate that land, even now with the SkyFarm, just the space for experimentation. And I think, to your point earlier about how difficult farming is, and this is something that we've heard from other farmers in town who are facing similar problems, certainly in Houston, but also across the United States. These are really large-scale political, economic issues that make it really difficult to be a small-scale farmer. But, in thinking of that, both these practices that you're modeling are really critical and exciting. And, I think everyone's going to be really thrilled to hear about, there's these practices that can help, reduce some of that chemical waste and can, use nature-based methods to heal some of the harm that we've done. But also you're talking about time and, not to be too cliched, but time is money.
Right.
And it's a huge investment on your part to have spent that amount of time and to be, really modeling and experimenting with things at the SkyFarm. And so I am curious about, what resources, as a small scale farmer, what resources are things that we should be thinking about for farm needs, for just the reality of what farming looks like and how we should be thinking about that work and labor and fairness around the way that we treat our small farmers?
That's a very good question. I used to think that that it would be good if Blackwood was just really big. And then I started thinking about in the permaculture world, edges are your most important, area, because it's where the greatest amount of growth takes place. So your skin is your edge. It is also the largest organ in your body, and it's constantly replacing itself. So when I think about people that live at home and they have their yard, however large or small it is, but if they could farm right there in their own backyard and partner up with all the other people on the block, somebody could grow cauliflower and somebody else could grow the lettuce and somebody else can grow tomatoes and cucumbers and then trade it all. wouldn't, I mean, it would just be a great way to build community. So, and if you have your own yard, harvest the water off of your roof and don't have any grass, and turn your lawn into food areas and cook. I mean, one of the things that happens here in Houston is that people go to a football game or to a volleyball game with their children, and then they go out to eat. And in many other communities, they go to the farmer's market and they go buy their food, they go to the volleyball game, and then they all head to somebody's house and they all cook together. So learning how to cook. So that's at the Sky Farmers Market. One of our goals with the USDA is that we educate about cooking and about food preparation. And so we will start using that time on the first and the third Sunday afternoon from 2 to 6. There will be cooking demonstrations like lacto-fermentation. Those are things that are easy to do.
What is lacto-fermentation, for those who don't know?
Right. Well, it's like kombucha. I mean, you're taking cabbage and making sauerkraut out of it.
So it's preservation methods.
Right, exactly. And at the at the land farm, about 6 weeks ago, we started having an open farm day every Saturday, and it's open from noon until 4 o'clock. Great food, and we've got free classes going on at the same time. So just this past week, on Saturday, we had a young woman, Anna, there, and she was talking to people and teaching them how to mill their own grains and make bread. And we had somebody out about fishing, and I'm going to teach people people say, I've taken class after class after class of learning how to garden and how to start seeds, but I still don't know how to do it. So I'm going to try yet with another method about mixing their soil. But I don't think people really are going to like growing as much until they learn to cook with what they're growing. Because I didn't know that I liked to cook until I started growing it, and now I love it.
That is fascinating. I kind of got into gardening over the pandemic. That was my intro, like many other people, was, I'm suddenly very excited by the couple of plants I bought from my patio.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, it's, I get way more excited when I can pull the mint or the basil off
Yes.
and go use it in the kitchen.
Yes. That is so exciting. And to think that, to me, it's just taking back your own power, your personal power as a human being of what can you do for yourself. And nobody can take that from you. When you learn how to do that, that is Weston's magic from growing your basil and your mint, whatever else you're doing. Nobody can take that from you. And I just think we also have a farm school, and I think that, and these are homeschool students, and if all of our children were brought up in a farm school like that, we wouldn't be in the pickle that we're in right now at all.
I mean, it's a totally different way of thinking about and viewing the world, as a kid, to be in this environment. And
Yes.
I think I take such, immense enjoyment, but like just pride for you
Yes.
in the educational work that you do, and especially always linking things to community. And it is exciting that, you're at Post Houston now, and that you're in this center that does seem so much traffic, that it does seem like a really incredible way to build community in the middle of downtown Houston.
Exactly. And you're standing on that roof, and you've got these beautiful murals that are being painted all over the buildings, and it's right there at eye level. So it's fabulous. I mean, you can see the Houston Ballet Building. I mean, it's amazing, and it's fun to be there.
Oh,
Great breeze, yes.
Everyone should go visit you, it sounds like, Saturdays from noon to 2, you said?
Noon to 4.
Noon to 4.
At the land farm, and then the first and third Sunday in the afternoon at the Sky Farm. But we're planning tons and tons of events at the Sky Farm with corporations, because they're coming out and doing their volunteer work, and we're providing breakfast for them. We can do lunch too, but we're providing breakfast for them, and they just get in a couple of hours of work before they have to go to the office. What a great day to start.
It sounds
Great way to start
wonderful.
your day.
I'm going to look up something to come out and have fun with you at the farm very soon.
Yes, please do.
Well, Cath Conlon is the CEO of Blackwood Educational Land Institute. Cath, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Weston.
And now we'll go to Bart Womack, who will tell us more about the Eden Grows system. Tell us what Eden Grow is, Bart.
So, Eden Grows Systems. And what Eden Grows Systems is, we're a NASA spinoff company. And what we've done is we've taken the most advanced farming technology that had ever been developed by NASA for off-world plant cultivation. And we've brought those systems down to earth. And essentially what our mission is to create farming systems that can give families and communities food independence using these kind of next-generation farming systems that are the most proficient farming systems ever developed by man. So the concept was to take this high technology, and one of the ways I like to explain it is right now in indoor farming, when I say indoor farming, the image that first comes to your mind, most people, is giant room, racks to the ceiling, in the center of the city, using hydroponics to grow leafy greens or herbs at scale.
That is what I imagine, yes.
That is the formula that 90% of the industry went with because they were asking the question, how do you build a more profitable farm? And when you're asking that question, you end up with this model. You're going to put it in the center of the city. You're going to put it next to a distribution node, and you're going to grow plants that are easy to grow and have succession planning or succession harvesting to where you're not having to replant. You can harvest again and again. Okay, so that's why you end up with this lettuce model that pretty much everybody has followed. We were asking a completely different question. Now, in answering our question, you wind up with an answer that does create the more profitable farm, but you create something that's way more versatile. And let me explain. What we asked was not how do you make the more profitable farm. We said, how do you build a farm that can operate at the end of the supply chain, go the longest amount of time without resupply, can be built and operated by people with no prior experience, and uses the least amount of human and electrical energy to accomplish its function? Okay. And when you ask that question, you end up with a way different answer. You don't end up with the, hey, just one model in the center of the city, because that was part of what we saw as being the problem as well. By trying to force one answer, one model, and putting yourself in a box, you're putting yourself in a box. What we said is no, you want to make the ultimate tool that can be utilized by different markets, and that every market, because of its environment, its economic situation, the amount of infrastructure it has access to or doesn't have access to, that the variables of deploying these kind of next generation systems was too wide to just say you're just going to grow lettuce. So that was what even led us first to getting the NASA, research and technology that had been in the 1990s. And when you're asking the question of how do you make the more proficient farm that's more efficient and easier to use, you end up running into the same questions of, deployment out in space, which is, how do you make something resource efficient? How do you make it easy to use? How do you make it to where it's going to be variable? Because different markets have different crop needs. Every market has something that they're spending way more money and energy to pull in from out of market to build. And so those are the things that are the most valuable that could actually be grown in that market, but those people don't have any experience. So how do you give them a tool that can get them up and going and create this new kind of infrastructure to where that community now is self-sufficient? Wherever it is, whether it's the isolated rural community, whether it's a luxury hotel, whether it's a military base, whether it's in Mexico, Ukraine, or Africa, in countries that don't have necessarily the kind of infrastructure that's already, been set up that we all take advantage of and enjoy, it's how do you deploy that new kind of infrastructure so that those people can have the same capability to create what they would normally be spending huge amounts of money to import.
So I'm curious because, in areas like downtown Houston, space is more limited and access to, these types of fresh produce may be restricted. So, what advantages does this technology offer compared to traditional farming methods, especially in these types of urban environments?
Totally. So, when you look at downtown, you look at everything east of downtown, it's in Precinct 2, which is actually the largest food desert in Texas.
What do you mean by food desert? We've
it on the
show before, but just for those who are new.
A food desert is an area that does not produce its own food.
Okay.
It's pulling in from other areas, so it has no production. Okay. So that whole area, it's highly urbanized, not much area to grow. So what we're able to do is we're able to bring in our technologies, and there's kind of two big uses that's going on in downtown and precinct 2.
Okay.
Okay, one is going into old commercial buildings and showing with our kind of systems that you can roll into these buildings. And right now in like downtown and in cities across the country, ever since the pandemic, there's this shift that commercial real estate's going through. That traditional office models aren't working anymore. Okay, so a lot of these buildings are getting really depleted in how many people are living in. I mean, how many people are utilizing them and renting them. Now the problem is converting those spaces from commercial into mixed use or residential. I didn't know about this until we started digging into it. Is actually very difficult, and the reason is because when you have a commercial building, the plumbing, think about it, it just goes up through the bathrooms. And when you're turning that same building into residential now, the CapEx, the expenditure that you have to go in and convert and pull that plumbing out and put it all in everywhere so everyone has a sink and a bathroom.
A lot of what you're talking about is that kind of issue of bathrooms in a commercial building being, 12 stalls in a very small area.
And it goes from floor to floor. It just goes straight up.
Exactly.
Whereas when you're going to build out, you have to have a whole, spider web coming out from that. And that's a big expense on buildings that are already not making money. So what we're going to show and we're proving in the Esperson building, no matter how old or how new the building is, what we can do is we can go into the building and we can start converting that unused commercial space into farming space. And it's way cheaper, and you can grow more profitable crops per square foot than what you could even charge per rent. So what we're going to do is we're going to show that you can take these commercial spaces, and a lot of the times in these big urban areas that have been built out, there is no farming spaces. So now you have the double whammy of being able to take a useless space or a space that was underperforming and turn it into a space that can actually be profitable, and at the same time, it's good for the community. It's good for the environment. It's good for food security. So like you start hitting all of these different social problems that we have in our cities and the dynamics of how things have been set up. Oh, and guess what? Now instead of those profits going outside of the community, going to, large corporations, they're going to stay in the community. So by leveraging these kind of solutions, we can take that old commercial space and reformat it. Now, the other thing that we're doing in Precinct 2 is we're working very closely with Adrian Garcia's office. And with our towers, most people think of indoor growing as just indoor growing. But what they don't understand is, and especially with the way that our systems are made, is you can use our systems as, I almost like to call them like plant vending machines. So you can go into an area where the community, we take for granted, people that are upwardly mobile and have college degrees and have a little bit more money, going to H-E-B and dropping $300 or $400 or Home Depot in the spring or the fall, it's a little bit of an expense, but it's not a world-changing expense to go and get your gardens set up for that year. But in underserved communities that don't necessarily have those resources, or in places like, rural areas of Mexico or war-ravaged Ukraine, or areas in Africa that don't have infrastructure, being able to drop one of our towers with a high-capacity setup, that means it's designed not to produce plants to maturity, but just produce starter plants. You can take one of our towers and in a 2x4 space, like a bookshelf, you're able to produce 325 plants every 30 to 50 days, depending on what plant you're growing. Okay? So now, think about it. You drop, and this is what we're doing in Precinct 2. The towers go into a local community center in a park. Now they're producing the plants that any other group, a Boy Scout group, a church, an old folks home, that necessarily didn't have a lot of money, though, can then come to the community center, and they're getting the plants that they're able to then take and
so
go
this is like
plant.
a starter garden for your garden.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So, literally just think of it as the infrastructure that you can go into areas that don't have access to plants, don't have access to the knowledge necessarily, or even the real estate to have greenhouses, and you're incubating hundreds or thousands of plants that you're injecting right into the community, that the community is then able to leverage into their own little victory gardens, essentially, in the community. So it's creating the backbone to allow for community organizations to begin to leverage and create their own gardens way more efficiently at way less of a cost. So that's in downtown and with Esperson and with Precinct 2. Those are the two main tracks that we see are valuable for like essentially revitalizing or breathing new life into areas that didn't necessarily have those options before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great to hear about these real-world projects that you're doing. I mean, I do want to highlight for listeners who aren't familiar, the Esperson project is Esperson Building downtown that exactly as you're saying you're going into. And how much of the building are you actually utilizing to start these pilots?
So right now we have a 4,000 square foot space. After that, we're moving into a 24,000 square foot space. It's going to essentially be a whole floor. So it's just, it's smart business. You do everything in phases. You show it works, and then you move to the next big phase. The owners of the Esperson building, they just bought a building next to them that's something like 80 or 90% vacant. And right now, if we can prove out this model, the idea is we're going to take that entire building and turn it into an indoor farm.
So some of what you were just talking about, I really want to get into, what are the environmental impacts of this? Because I think, and some of what I've read about the way that you're setting up these systems, it seems like you're really trying to move towards a more circular food system. And so can you talk a little about the ways that this is, and you've said it's an environmental good, but what does that mean? How is this, a new method for us we should think about?
So, what it essentially is the world supply system that we know of and has really been conceptualized by the term globalization, okay? The whole story of the 20th century is that essentially after World War II, we have wrapped the whole world together and we've brought it all into like one giant market, all right? And so what you have is there's peaches today that are being grown in Argentina, and then they're going to be shipped over to Vietnam, and they're going to be packaged in Vietnam, and then they're going to be shipped to the United States and sold in the United States because it has all been optimized because the packaging is the cheapest in Vietnam, and the peaches can be grown the best in year-round in Argentina, and the market is always open in the U.S., okay? The problem is that and this word has been so abused, but it's not a sustainable system, okay? The system has been optimized for, and I'm a capitalist, but the system's been optimized for capital efficiency and not resource efficiency. And so the problem is that we're draining the world's aquifers. We're dumping huge amounts of nitrogen into the ocean. Like right now off the coast of New Orleans, there's a 600 mile dead zone that's growing every year because of all the nitrogen runoff coming off of the Mississippi. We've destroyed the bioregenerative fungal biome that's inside the soil that took hundreds of years to be created, and that's by just dumping synthetic compounds into the soil. It gets us the results that we want, but it continues to degrade the soil health. So these things are not sustainable. They are heading mathematically for certain walls that are going to mean that they're going to start to break down. I mean, there's even areas in the U.S. that we have drained the aquifers that you can drive through that, 20, 50 years ago were vast farmland, and they were just pumping water. Well, that water ran out, and now those areas are, just turning back into like basically desert. Because there's no more water. And so, deploying these kind of systems allows for the mitigation of what's going to have to happen. There's going to have to be new types of infrastructure brought on to even supply. In the Obama White House, they did a study that showed just for us to meet the demand for food by 2050 with population growth, we would need another 1 billion hectares of arable farmable land. That's a landmass the size of Canada or Brazil of you're talking about green, fertile, nice, easy to farm land. It doesn't physically exist. But I'm not a catastrophist. I don't think that we're doomed. Humanity, again, I'll use an unpopular example, but an example economically nonetheless. The technology for doing fracking existed since the 1950s. Okay, it was never economically viable to use it until energy prices got to a certain point, and then all of a sudden it became. Now, again, I don't support that. I think there's all kinds of environmental problems it creates, but nonetheless, the example that I'm using is accurate in that when things become profitable enough, then technologies and solutions that previously weren't profitable to deploy suddenly become profitable to deploy.
Well, and fracking, I mean, is also about a story of technological innovation. Technology changed a great deal from the 50s to get to where it eventually became popular. In the same way that that other listeners might prefer this example, solar panels.
Yeah,
were
that's a much
not-
better. I should have used that one. Thank you. And that is, and I equate us to solar panels numerous times because it's a new kind of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay. What we need are new types of infrastructure to solve these problems.
Oh, and on a practical level as well, this is a larger conversation that goes into kind of environmental resilience conversations, which is tricky, but essentially the reality of most places are going to be experiencing a lot more disaster events. And the reality is the more that you have, whether it's microgrids on the power side or access to food systems, as we're living in a society that is going to continue to see disastrous consequences, having resources immediately hand at a localized level is really becoming something that is essential for, especially if we think along the Gulf Coast. It's a hurricane-prone area, and that kind of access to resource becomes really, really critical. Sienna, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to expand a little bit more about the impact of eat and grow systems on communities. You mentioned a little bit previously on the Boy Scouts or schools, and I want to learn more about any do you have any opportunities for programs in these types of schools?
Yeah, no, that's really great. I founded a charity called Feed the Future, and you can go to their website. It's called feedthefuture.us. And the same way that Eden's whole purpose is to be the supplier of the technology and the knowledge, Feed the Future is the entity that is designed to help communities organize. Okay? When I first looked at all the problems that were coming, my first reaction was like, oh my gosh, I got to get out to the country. I got to get my family out to the country. We need to build a farm. We got to go all in. And while I am still doing that, but what I realized is that actually wasn't the solution. And that's everyone's first reaction when they first see all of the problems that we're facing. It's a natural and intelligent reaction. But true wisdom is understanding the step beyond that, which is if you do that and you only try to take care of yourself, then I am a believer, and I don't think that living that kind of selfish life is going to be rewarded in this world or the next. But even from a secular standpoint, the best you can hope for in that scenario is you end up on a mountain with the zombie hordes coming to get your food. All right? No one is coming to save us, and you can't run away. So if no one's coming to save us and you can't run away, then the only option you have left is you got to figure out real fast how you're going to be part of the solution. And the solution isn't running away. And then it gets into the next step, which is the more I researched this and the more I came to understand it, a lot of times I refer to what we're trying to accomplish as Amish 2.0. Okay? The Amish actually have the most intelligent model. And if you take their model of community support and wrapping the community together and add technology to it, which is what they shrewd, I get that. But if you take the community aspect and you take these next generation technologies, what you discover is 10 families don't need 10 tractors. 10 families need one tractor. And it's way more affordable, way more efficient, and way faster for the 10 families to work together to have the tractor for the community. Now, the tractor becomes these next-generation farming technologies. And the communities, whether it's through the church, whether it's through your school, whether it's through your community organization, whatever it is, it's about bringing your community together and starting to build out these new infrastructures. And then once you do that, and once enough of us do that, gradually this net will be created, what you were referring to. This decentralized net will be created. Then instead of having giant hard targets, whether it's people or Mother Nature that are attacking them and degrading them, now you have 1,000 targets spread out to where even if you start hitting 1, 2, even 10 of them, you can't take down the whole system because it's so decentralized and networked together. The food system will only continue to get worse until we learn how to work together, mobilize our communities, and implement these technologies. And if we do that, then we will wind up in a positive human future that will look unbelievable. Because that's the other thing. Everyone's scared right now, and it's scary. But the same symbol in Japanese calligraphy for crises and danger is also the symbol for opportunity. The old systems that have damaged the earth, created these inequalities, and created this lack of abundance and lack of security are the same systems that they're just going to offer to replace the old systems with, unless we, the people, have the conversation and demand it through our action in our own communities. So I'm sorry, to answer your question, feedthefuture.us, it's a charity. Its whole purpose is to create roadmaps for communities to be able to begin organizing so that they can transform their communities into food production, food secure zones.
Okay, last thing I just want to ask is, going back a little bit to what we were talking about at the beginning, is you've described the system as very different from what we kind of imagine in our heads of vertical farming. What are some of the things that you're growing? Because I know that you're beyond just leafy greens. So
yeah.
What are
thank you so much. So what makes the NASA technology is so different is it's aeroponics. Okay.
What does that mean?
Aeroponics is hydroponics is when the roots hang down in water and are sucking everything out of water. Aeroponics are when the roots are literally hanging in an open chamber and they get hit with a 50 part per million mist. The roots begin to breathe in the water and the nutrients. And what this means is they use less water, less nutrients. They grow about 30% faster because they're transferring the energy that they would normally utilize in pulling the water and the nutrients out of whatever substrate, whether it's dirt or water. Now they're able to just transfer that energy into growing faster. Now, the other thing about aeroponics is you can grow any kind of fruit or vegetable in it. Hydroponics, very good for leafy greens. If you know what you're doing, you can use hydroponics for tomatoes and strawberries if you're very good at what you're doing. With aeroponics, and what we've done with our systems is you put seed in and you go. And we've grown any raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, peppers, tomatoes, green beans, all the leafy greens, all of the herbs. With our systems, you can even grow potatoes. You can grow sweet potatoes, beets, onions. We had a post go viral about 2 weeks ago on our Facebook channel. We went from having 400 subscribers to having 24,000. Because we had a 30-second video that showed one of our potato towers that our grower, who has no experience, she has her own video. We actually hired someone literally with no experience to be our master grower. And we're like, okay, you're in charge of growing now. And she even was like, I don't think I can do this. And she said, when we said, no, that's the point. We want someone that's never been. She's like, I have a black thumb. Everything I grow dies. We're just like, you're perfect. You're hired. I don't think she could believe it. But, she was just sitting there in one of our potato towers just pulling potatoes out of the tower. And the reason it first started going viral is people kept coming in and they were like, this is AI. This is fake. There's no machine that you can buy that's just going to grow potatoes. And we kept posting, videos and like, no, here's another angle and here's the pictures. And, no, it's just a machine that you can put in your house that, like, right now I think we're up to like 1.5 pounds and we're just keeping improving, where you can, just be pulling little organic, nutrient-dense potatoes right off the vine and cooking them for your family. So that's, again, what makes this technology so powerful. Is it literally can grow any kind of fruit or vegetable, including root vegetables.
So something that you mentioned is this idea of not just growing indoors, but also growing externally. And you were talking a little about Singapore earlier.
Sure. Well, I mean, let me step up. If you go and look at Singapore, if you look at Dubai, and even more, like, when I ask you to envision, like, tell me what the positive vision of the future is, okay? What you're going to see is you're going to see landscapes that there's just food and forests and greenery growing everywhere. With Eden technology, we can do that. We can transform our environment. And I like to, and thank you for giving me the opportunity, if you type in positive versus negative future or the two futures in your search engine, you're going to get a lot of pictures that show like this road forking. And down one road, it shows like the Brave New World, Blade Runner, industrial, drones in the skies, and it's dark and, it looks very unhealthy and unhappy. And then on the other path is like the buildings covered with foliage and the sun is shining and the sky is blue and there's food forests everywhere and everyone's just walking around and there's abundance everywhere. That's a real future. We can have that future. But it demands that we have license. It demands that we make a choice. The most important message, if there was nothing else that people took from what I said today, it's that if you want to have a good future, you have to be an active participant in making it happen. The future can be the Garden of Eden. That's why I named the company Eden. The technology is there. We could transform, and that's my vision for downtown Houston. 40 years from now, my goal is for downtown Houston and for Houston to become a leader and to show the world that these technologies can be deployed, and then in doing so, we can transform our urban landscapes into gardens of paradise. And in doing so, lay the foundation for that positive human future that we all want.
Terrific. Bart Womack is the CEO and founder of Eden Grow Systems. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, brother. Really appreciate you.
Yeah. Lastly, we'll turn to our researcher, Jaden, who has an update on how to get involved around Houston this week.
Hey y'all, I hope you're doing well. This week I have 2 great volunteering opportunities for all of the bird lovers in the Houston area. First, we have the bird collision monitoring taking place all week long, from Monday to Friday starting at 6:30 a.m. and concluding at 9 a.m. You can partake in collecting data on bird collisions in downtown Houston to address the issues of light pollution. Houston ranks second among U.S. cities in exposing migrating birds to light pollution, which attracts and disorients them, leading to collisions or vulnerability to ground threats. Houston Audubon collaborates with organizations like Cornell Lab of Ornithology to create monitoring programs. Volunteers will walk approximately 2 miles, encompassing around 10 buildings, working in teams of 2 to 3 in the early mornings. No expert bird knowledge is needed, as data is entered into the iNaturalist app for identification. In order to participate, you must complete trainings that cover data collection and handling injured birds. If this opportunity interests you, head on over to Houston Audubon to sign up and go through your video trainings today. The second wonderful volunteering opportunity also happens to be with Houston Audubon, and it is also running all week long. So from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., don't miss out on your opportunity to volunteer during spring migration. With spring migration attracting countless people, volunteers are needed to assist at kiosks, handling admissions, merchandise sales, and maintaining daily sighting lists. This is another experience that also requires 0 prior experience, just a lot of enthusiasm. All of the necessary trainings will be provided on site. So if you'd like to participate in this opportunity, please go to Houston Audubon to sign up and watch the video trainings. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and happy volunteering.
Up next time on Gulf Streams, we're speaking with Anita J. Singani, head chef and co-owner of Pondicherry Cafe, an award-winning restaurant here in Houston, when we'll be talking with her all about food and ways that you can act to make your diet a little better for the planet. If you have questions or ideas for what you'd like featured on Gulf Streams, leave a voicemail at 713-348-4081 or email me at westont@rice.edu. A quick reminder that you can catch up on Gulf Streams anytime through our podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Gulf Streams is a co-production of KPFT Houston and Rice's Center for Environmental Studies, with support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and the Rice Sustainability Institute's Eco Studio. Produced by Weston Twardowski. Co-produced by Joseph Campana. Audio engineer Rico Enriquez. Research support provided by Jaden Bray-Boyce and Sienna Yen. Stay tuned for the R&R Show with Ronnie Renfro and Tom Richards here on KPFT Houston 90.1 FM, Galveston 89.5 FM, and Huntsville 89.7 FM.